Happy Four Nations Eve to all who celebrate. Canada and Sweden are about to get underway tomorrow, and it's going to be a big game. Might this also be a big trade week? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we have some good stuff to get through. It is about to be the start of the Four Nations face-off, and, a lot of folks are probably feeling maybe not as excited as they should be. There actually are some really interesting things, though, just for Jets fans to watch out for, some of which actually might involve some trade discussion. We will chat about that a little bit later. I think that there's a lot to actually consider for Winnipeg fans in particular, outside of just some of our star reps going to stand in for their country. Now, a little bit of a spoiler, Mark Scheifele has actually been held off the roster. It looks like Crosby's good to go. So Scheifele is now going to have a couple of weeks of rest, which, if you ask me, I feel pretty okay with that. Scheifele, on and off this year, has been injured and dealing with stuff and kind of forced himself to play through it. So a couple of weeks of rest and a pissed-off Scheifele who's extra motivated to show why he deserved to be on this roster to begin with probably isn't the worst, especially heading into a busy playoff season. But before we dive into a preview ahead of the game tomorrow, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, let's talk about this joke of a team, Team Canada, man. This roster is, every year you see a Team Canada something, right? Maybe the World Junior squad was disappointing. This team for the Four Nations face-off is pretty darn ridiculous. Up front, you've got Reinhart, McDavid, and Marner. Second line, Stone, Crosby, and McKinnon. Third line, Marchand, Point, and Jarvis. And your fourth line is Hagel, Cirelli, and Bennett. On defense, you've got Taves and Makar. Then the second pairing, Morrissey and Parayko. And I want to talk about the Morrissey-Parayko one a little bit later, because that one could be something to track for Jets-related considerations. Third pairing is Theodore and Doughty. Now, this is just, barring maybe one or two names that you could arguably interchange with some of the other players out there for Team Canada, what do you even say about this team? This top nine is just unbelievable. The first two lines, it's going to be video game stuff, right? I'm super excited to see what Stone, Crosby, and McKinnon can do together. Imagine, having McKinnon and Crosby on the same line. McKinnon's already leading the league in points and has just been an unholy force. Up front, you've got Reinhart and McDavid. Reinhart feels like he's going to score 30 goals in like 4 games alongside McDavid. So this should be a fascinating team. Yes, I'm American. Yes, I probably, I do have some complicated rooting interests here, but I'm just excited to see this talent. This reminds me a lot of the feeling I got when I watched Team North America, right? This time with a little bit more of a Canadian bent, but hey, you've got, a Manitoba boy and Seth Jarvis. That should be fun to watch. And this is just an explosive team. And of course, Morrissey anchoring the second pairing with Parayko. We've got our own rooting interests as Jets fans, but wow, this team is super explosive. And let's just talk about that power play, right? The number one power play unit is just hilarious. Reinhart, McDavid, Crosby, McKinnon, and Makar. Now, will it be as good as the Jets' top power play? Let's be honest. We are going to be a little bit biased and say no. But joking aside, this should be a pretty automatic unit. You have so much talent that the only way this really fails is if you think about those super teams in football, right? Real Madrid and a few others where something, doesn't quite work with the assemblage of talent and personalities. But I would say that I think this unit's going to be absolutely delightful. If you look at their second unit, it's equally as ridiculous, from like an NHLer standpoint. Definitely not quite as good of a unit, but Stone, Point, Marner, Morrissey, and Theodore all together. I mean, you're just going to have some delightful hockey. There is one weakness for this team, though, and it is in net. You've got Hill and Binnington. Now, Binnington might actually be able to handle the task load, but Hill has not been good this year. So if there's one thing Canada is going to have to be wary of, it's how many opportunities they give their opponents to score. And this is going to be one of the sneaky tournaments that I think it's going to give Canada fits, right? This is a really good team, but you can only ever have your top end guys out a certain number of minutes. And I'm sure some NHL teams have probably been a little bit cautious about, asking maybe for a favor or two to not play them 40 minutes a night. So it will be interesting to see how Cooper runs this thing. But this is an exciting team. As just a hockey fan, I'm excited to see it. The other side is a very interesting opponent. Sweden obviously does not have anywhere near the same depth in terms of elite talent, but this is a sneaky, fun team. Up front, you've got Forsberg, Pettersson, and Kempe. This is actually a thing where I didn't even realize Kempe had Swedish ancestry, so that's pretty cool. The second line, you've got Ricard, Zibanejad, and Nylander. And Raquel has actually been doing really well recently for the Penguins, and should be a very interesting fit. Zbad used to be really good, and I sort of wonder if not having the pressure of being a Ranger and instead repping the team country colors is going to be a bit of a spark for him. Now, your third line might be one of the most intriguing for Sweden fans. Bratt, Eriksson, Ek, and Raymond is a very, very, under-the-radar elite line. I love Eriksson Ek. He's a guy that I wish the Jets had at one point targeted. And you've got really great scoring talent and Bratt and Raymond out on your wings. That could be a lot of fun. Your fourth line is Arvidsson, Lindholm, and Nyquist. This feels like the old dudes line, veterans who have certainly been around the block a little bit. Lindholm definitely a little bit younger than the other guys, but veteran savvy with Arvidsson and Nyquist really can't hurt. A little bit of elite playoff experience, so should be a fun team. Now, where I think there's probably even more excitement for Team Sweden is always the defense, right? This is one of their hallmark signatures. Hedman and Brodin on your first pairing, Dahlin and Anderson on your second, and Ekholm and Carlson on your third. Can you imagine the year in 2025, Erik Karlsson is a third pairing guy? I mean, you probably don't think of it that closely, right? Because realistically, you could play any of these pairings pretty evenly. So I don't think we're going to worry about him actually playing like the least amount of minutes. If anything, I think Karlsson is probably going to get a good workout. So hope his cardio is at the most insane level because he's probably going to be skating a lot. In net, they've got Gustafsson and Ullmark. This, I think, is the big equalizer for this first game. Gus and Ullmark are both elite goalies, and they've really been rounding into form this year. Ullmark, Vezina winner. Gus, I actually think, should be in the Vezina conversation, and obviously we know who's winning the Vezina. It's Hellebuyck, no question. But if we're talking at least in the conversation, Gustafsson's really, really good, and Ullmark has started to play more and more like that elite version. We've also not even seen this defense at its absolute best. Gustav Forsling is kind of being held out right now just with some day-to-day stuff, so this team could be a really frustrating opponent to play. There's a lot of skill in the back end. I think that the forward talent is a little bit underappreciated, which is funny to say about a team that's got Pettersson and company. So maybe we'll talk all of this in relative terms, but this should be a really fun game. If I'm going to do a prediction, I think 5-3 Canada. Be curious to know what you think. Give me your score predictions below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But 5-3, that's what I'm going with. I think it's going to be a sloppy, very fun first game and probably tons of chaos. But I did mention that there's been some trade talk, and one of these pairings for the Jets may actually hold some significant interest for us as fans to watch. I want to tell you about that in just a little bit. But before we dive too much further into the trade market, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to place a bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, be sure to check out how you can combine your live bets for a same-game parlay. Now, if you've been kind of tracking the past couple of weeks, obviously the Super Bowl just wrapped up yesterday, but Luka Doncic to the Lakers, this is Probably something that I don't think anyone bet on, but now that he's there, do you think the Lakers might have a real championship shot? Do you think LeBron might add another ring to his already impressive haul? What if you want to bet on an individual Lakers game? Well, this is the best way to do it. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some relatively interesting trade rumors, some things that the Jets have been linked to, and a particular defensive pairing that I think is going to be one to watch throughout this upcoming Four Nations tournament. Now, let me preface this, right? The Four Nations is not going to be the best reflection of what a deep pairing for Jets purposes is going to look like at the NHL level, right? This is like a tournament of crazy, stupidly elite players, and Team Canada is going to have puck support unlike any other squad in the NHL. So with all of that in mind, I still think it's worth talking about the chemistry and how a pairing might look. And Morrissey-Parayko in particular is very interesting. Parayko kind of fits. I think if I forget if it was Merrick or Sportsnet or one of the other podcasts talking about the Jets needing mobile beef. I think the mobility part is especially important because the Jets have size. They're not that small of a team. They're usually in the top 10 or top 15 teams in terms of total height or average height. But you look at Logan Stanley, right? And Stanley, he's big, but he's not very mobile, at least not in the defensive zone. So the Jets need mobility on the back end that can bring size and kind of push people around. Offensively, same deal. You want a big center of some sort. A big winger would be fine, but I think you probably want that beef down the middle to kind of dominate the faceoff circle, be a net front presence, and really drive a lot of attention at the central areas around the slot, right? So Morrissey-Parayko is of probably particular note for Jets fans because Parayko, I think, is a guy the Jets have long had some level of interest in. I don't know if they've ever really considered trying to acquire him, but with Winnipeg's window very clearly being this year and next year, the playoff field looking to be pretty mediocre, relatively speaking, the Blues likely needing to sell some big assets, Parayko could be available. And Colton, he's never going to be the guy to lead the offensive charge like he was when Shattenkirk and some of the other guys were around, and that blue line was a lot more mobile and active, the earlier Krug days. But he could actually do a pretty solid job of being a defensive stop block next to Morrissey, right? If Morrissey is kind of your offensively activating guy, adding Parayko on the right side with a monster shot at a reasonable-ish cap hit doesn't really seem as far-fetched. And I think because he's got so much term, he has like another 5 or 6 years. To me, I kind of wonder if the Jets could be paid to take on this deal. Now, what really interests me is if the Jets do a one-stop shop. I kind of have some eyes for Dylan Holloway. If you could find a way to make Holloway and Parayko somehow work for the Jets, that's a package that I think really ticks off a lot of boxes for how Winnipeg likes to shop. It's usually somebody off the board, somebody that they're not really being linked to as closely. Monahan, I think last year was probably a bit of an exception, but like the Toffoli thing wasn't really as early connected, right? I feel like the Toffoli thing came pretty late. And so I wonder if this might kind of be a similar situation. Now, I don't think Holloway's necessarily on the market. He just got to St. Louis. He's an RFA with, a couple of years of control here. And so I don't know that he would be the guy that St. Louis would want to move first. But I think compared to guys like Kyrou and Thomas, he's more expendable. Now, Kyrou and Thomas could potentially be on the market. I think that there's been some trade rumors. If that's the route the Jets take, things get very interesting very quickly. That's when you're talking about moving guys like Perfetti, Lambert, etc. So that I think I want to say for a separate topic, just because that particular trade is a lot different in nature than the Morrissey-Parayko one. If the Jets do the Parayko option, for one thing, it's going to preclude Neil Pionk's extension, right? I think, basically from that point on, it's the Parayko show because he's $6.5 million. He's got 5 or 6 years left. That's your Pionk money. I have concerns about whether he'd be worth that, to be honest. And he's 31 years old, right? He's not young, but he is big. He's relatively mobile. He's got a booming shot that he may be able to use a little more actively alongside somebody who's doing so much more of the transition and offensive work in a Morrissey and who's drawing all that attention. So color me intrigued. Sandberg and Parayko together would probably dominate. I mean, there's any way that you could really configure this that you would want. I almost wonder if the Jets prefer Morrissey and DeMello because they have that sort of loyalty and seniority up front. But, Parayko could be a really interesting option if the price is cheap. And I think it probably would not be that expensive because the Blues probably just want to get that cap space back. Parayko is not cheap. He costs a fair bit. And, they are probably a team that needs to retool or longer term start to consider a rebuild. So, interested to see how Morrissey and Parayko handle things. Do they look really good together? Is there natural chemistry? The Blues are not a great proxy for how some of their individual talents might play outside of that system. So that, I think, is probably where a lot of my interest is going to be directed. So we'll just have to wait and see how that all pans out. But on the other trade front, in terms of guys who are not necessarily repping their nations right now, the Jets have, of course, been linked to Ristolainen and Laughton out of Philadelphia, and to some degree Evans out of Montreal. I will just say it right out. If the Jets trade for Laughton or Evans, I feel like that's a mistake. They are fine depth forwards, but in terms of what the Jets really should be swinging for here, both are going to be too expensive for what they bring to the team. And I just don't really think that's the kind of skill that I would really want the Jets to go for. Yes, they're going to be good forecheckers with some solid two-way play. Evans is, a little bit on the younger side too, but I'm looking for like a Brock Nelson. I'm looking for a needle mover with some real offensive punch. I'm not really that into, just sort of bottom six players who are going to fortify your depth, but who may not move the needle offensively. I think this is a year where if you're going to make a big trade, you're going to be throwing out a first round pick or a prospect. You got to make sure that you're getting something really good in return. And for me, Evans and Laughton they're fine guys, and I think Laughton would actually fit here quite nicely. So if Laughton is in addition to some other acquisitions, I don't hate it, but the contract control with him giving some term and probably what Philadelphia is going to be asking for him, I just don't like it. I don't think it really makes a lot of sense. Evans kind of in a similar price range. I mean, they're asking for minimum a second round plus. That, for me, is just a no-go. I feel like there are better ways to use your cap space and your asset pool. So no to those. Ristolainen's one of those guys where I sort of have the Buffalo Sabres version of him in mind. And if that's the version the Jets get, you really want to stay far away. But if it's the version in Philadelphia that's been a relatively capable second pairing guy, I mean, he's all right. I would probably think Parayko has the bigger ceiling, but Ristolainen could probably do a job along Sandberg. The other thing with Ristolainen is that he's not really signed for eternity. He's got like 2 or so years after this, a little over $5 million. So it's not like a horrible contract. I just feel like the risk of him kind of reverting to his pre-Torts days is very high. So, do I think he's decent? Probably. And if you give him a pairing with Sandberg, I think you'd probably have a pretty elite group there. I honestly think Sandberg could make almost anyone look fantastic. Dylan's an elite first pairing guy, and I think you could probably attach a wagon to him, and he would still put up, top pairing numbers. So I don't really worry about that. I just kind of wonder, if you're, again, spending assets, you're looking for a big player. Risto's probably not going to be that cheap. Probably your first round pick or something, or that equivalent is going to be in play. Unless the Flyers are willing to take some sort of a discount, I've got very mixed feelings about it. So far, the early trade links for the Jets have kind of been so-so to me, and I think that might be purposeful. Usually the Jets like to have a little misdirection before they go for their real targets. And so I kind of wonder if the Jets are maybe trying to drive up the price elsewhere in conjunction with some of these teams, because they're looking at folks who are going to fall out of the playoffs or on the later side, and they want to have a market where people are going to have to start dumping stuff before they get no value. That's why I continue to think Utah is an interesting target. Utah Hockey Club has some players I really like. They've got some really good forwards. Maybe that's a shopping destination for the Jets to consider in the future, but we'll have to see how all of that pans out. It's not like they're that close to a playoff spot either. So for me, I think the Jets really do have a whole world of oysters to crack open. It's just how late are they going to wait to crack it open? How long are they going to play this game? Going to be a very interesting conversation. But all I can say is I am reasonably excited. But one guy who might get packaged up in one of these deals is Ville Heinola, and I want to chat about why his time is probably coming to an end with Winnipeg in just a brief moment. But before we dive into the Heinola situation, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Indeed. You just realized that you needed to hire somebody for your business yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Well, good news, Indeed is here to help. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's Sponsored Jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. I've actually used Indeed when I was looking for work way back when. Their resume matching system not only asked you for your work experience and stuff, but also salary requirements, your domains of interest and expertise, and it actually brought up relevant job listings immediately, like stuff that actually fits pretty much all of my requirements, all of my work experiences, and stuff that could actually fit my work background. And I thought it was great. So I can only imagine for a business owner who needs to find candidates, qualified candidates, that is, fast, Indeed has to be super convenient. And now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Everyone, we are chatting a little bit about some interesting stuff, some trade rumors, some random thoughts here and there, and one of them that's kind of come out a little bit. Elliot Friedman was talking earlier about Ville Heinola needing a change of scenery, and yeah, at this point, I think that's probably the same boat I'm in. I think what really frustrates me over the years with Heinola is that whether he plays well or poorly or just even average, it never seems to make a difference. He maybe plays 2 games, 3 games at most in a stretch, and then he gets benched for like a month and a half. And at that point, it's just like, what are you actually gaining from this? And I think with Heinola, we don't even really know what he is. We've never seen him in a sustained stretch of NHL duty, some of which, was injury related, but now you have a relatively healthy Heinola. He's had a couple of games this year. Some of them have been much better than others. And, after those great games and after the terrible or even mediocre games, he still ends up in the press box not long after. And so I just don't really understand what the point of keeping him around is. It's very clear that whatever Arniel said about him, being a huge fan and all that stuff really hasn't had that much of an impact on the actual day-to-day decision-making in the lineup. Heinola hasn't played since December, maybe early January at the most recent, which is a lot of time to sit in the press box. Yes, Ville did sign a 2-year contract, but at this point, you just got to be, feeling a little bit for the kid, right? He hasn't ever really gotten a chance to be something, and we don't really know what he is at this point. So if the Jets waive him or trade him or something, which I don't even know what you get in a trade, it probably can't be more than a 4th or a 5th round pick. Just cut him loose. I feel like this whole thing of Arniel's defensive pecking order just really sits and really focuses around Logan Stanley. And for me, I don't really understand why this is the hill the Jets have died on for years. You don't really see other NHL organizations have a particular depth player that they're just completely and utterly married to. Even guys like Reeves or whatever, usually they kind of trade teams not too long after, but Stanley feels like the eternal experiment. And at this point, you just have to cut your losses. Stanley's not getting better. He is what he is, which is a 7th D. And if that was the role that he was given, I really wouldn't be upset. But I feel like, the opportunity cost of what Stanley has now hurt the Jets with, I just don't really get it. And I feel for Logan too, because like he's being asked to do stuff that's clearly not working out. I see his body language is very frustrated when he's out there and he wants to make a right play. He wants to clear the puck quickly and he just can't get his body to do it. And like the coaching staff has to be recognizing this and helping the kid out. He's like doing his best. He always works hard. He always shows up. And it just seems like he consistently gets thrown to the wolves, relatively speaking. And like, I don't really understand why the coaching staff has made this the option of their whole selection, right? Like if you've got a third pairing, you talked for weeks about rotating. You talked about how much you liked Heinola, and we haven't seen Ville for weeks now. So what was the point of it? I know that the Jets have been winning a lot of games recently, and I think that that's part of why Stanley continues to play. But I also sort of ask myself, I don't think like Logan or Ville are necessarily the answers for a playoff run, but at least during the regular season, you probably want to see if Heinola can at least provide a little more puck-moving ability, right? His passing, his transition skating, all that stuff tends to be a reasonable skill set that's needed at the NHL level, and especially for the Jets, who don't exactly have the world's fastest defense. So I feel like, enough is enough at this point. Ville doesn't deserve to keep sitting in the press box for the rest of his career. Just cut him loose, man. It doesn't make sense. And I know Marat said something about next year being Ville's year, but we say that every year. We said it about this season. Arneal kept preaching about it, and it didn't really turn out to be all that true. So why force him to sit another year? Unless all of this was some ploy to trade Stanley and drive up his trade value, I really don't think that there's any point in keeping Heinola anymore. I don't really buy the trade value pump anyways, because I feel like I just think they like Stanley, and I think that they can't ever really, admit to the fact that they were wrong with the draft pick. He didn't have a high ceiling to begin with. It never worked out, and he is what he was always destined to be, which actually, I'll be honest, he's probably better than that because a lot of folks didn't think that he was really going to make the NHL. He made tremendous strides to get his game up to a pro caliber, and I think that should be applauded. Like his growth from where he was in Windsor to where he is now is like night and day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he really is a guy you want to keep starting on your third pairing. So, I just look back at the record of players the Jets have drafted, guys who have gone on to find success elsewhere. I see Heinola becoming another one of those players, and it just sucks, man. Like you talk about struggling to attract good talent. You struggle with defensive talent especially, and some of the players who probably could be contributing right now to the Jets, Winnipeg basically said they don't believe in them, and now they're off doing better stuff. Chisholm is a second pairing guy from Minnesota. Kovacevic, he's, a top pairing player for the New Jersey Devils, a team that thinks it's a Stanley Cup contender and kind of is in that conversation. So, adding Heinola to the pile of players that you sacrificed for Stanley just feels not great. And I feel like that only adds even more weight upon Stanley's shoulders that the dude just doesn't need. So Winnipeg, man, I don't get it. One day, maybe they'll move past this stuff and, kind of be a little more open-minded about how they approach their roster construction. But this is just one of those weird quirks that they continue to struggle with. And it's very weird that a team that's really talked about taking big steps forward and honestly has in a lot of departments can't move past 2 to 3 particular things that I still feel are remnants of their old ways. But be curious to know what your thought is. Do you think it's time to let Heinola go? Would you even just cut him and hope some team claims him? Let me know your thoughts about the Heinola situation in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we will have a recap of Canada versus Sweden and chat about whether or not the Jets are about to get in on the trade action, with a lot of contract and trade talk being mentioned as a big part of this four-nation tournament. So we will see you tomorrow. As always, though, have a great night, and go Jets go.